It has taken countless evolutionary epochs to make man what he is, the most ferocious, hirsute beast of prey that inhabits the caverns and jungles of Earth. Can his osseous mechanism and pathological instincts be summarily extinguished or reversed, merely by connecting him, per an electric wire laid through the sewers of Rome, to the feeble dynamos of Bethlehem and Tarsus? Can his structural anatomy, intended for conflict and slaughter, be transformed in a day, a year, or even in a million of suns? To overmaster and devour his neighbor in the reasoned effort to obtain food and booty, land, love, renown, and gold, is bred into the very marrow of his bones. Therefore, all efforts made by reformers and messiahs to transfigure him into a lamb are foreordained to fathomless failure. Indeed, it would be much more reasonable of them to attempt the transfiguration of a grizzly bear into a parlor poodle, or propose the transformation of a bald-headed eagle into a gently cooing turtle dove. Nearly all the prophetic demigods of democracy, from Paul and Isaiah to Carlyle and Ruskin, have ever been madly screeching by the roadside, vainly endeavoring to stay the march of a world of bannered armies striding grimly, sternly by. What are these howling prophets of evil but dogs eloquently baying at the moon? Right wheel, there. Right wheel, turn back, you are going to the devil, is their resounding, ear-splitting chorus, but the human flood sweeps on silently, scornfully, confident, inspired as it were by some overmastering instinct. We may be going to the devil, is the unspoken retort of these thundering legionnaires, these nations, but even so, is not the devil honest, the destroyer of deception, the disobedient one? Can you lasso the stars with a green-hide lariat? Can you block the march of might with magnificent howls of declamatory despair? No. Skyward or hellward, man moves on and on and on. If there are barricades in his way, he must surmount them or blast them aside. If there are wild beasts ready to spring upon him, he must destroy them or they will destroy him. If the high road leads through hells, then those infernos must be besieged, assailed, and taken possession of. Aye, even if their present monarchs have to be rooted out with weapons as demoniac and deadly as their own. This world is too peaceful, too acquiescent, too tame. It is a circumcised world, nay, a castrated world. It must be made fiercer before it can become grander and better and more natural. Fools indeed are they who would arrest the unfolding process with humanitarian Cagliostroism and rescue the perishing mummery. Maniacs are they who would ward off the sun's blazing rays from withering souls, or the blighting frosts of winter from hearts that are already broken. For, I doubt not, through the ages one tremendous purpose runs, and maturing crops are ripened with the process of the suns, to be sickled down, threshed and rolled away. 2. Undoubtedly, the black magic of the Christ myth, combined with the subterranean sorcery of medieval sacerdotalism, has partially succeeded, not only in sapping individual initiative, but also in suppressing in our race many of its ancestral leonine traits and superb barbarian virtues. But as yet it has not wholly triumphed in its emasculating necromancy. No, it has not transfigured us all into teams of contented oxen and bunches of earmarked sheep, although that is its final hope. There are some of the grand old stock left alive. The lion is still the lion, although his teeth have been most foully filed down by abominable moral codes, his skin made scrofulous with the mange and leprosy of caged peacefulness, his paws fetid by links of slave-voted statutes, and an iron collar of state officialism wound around his regal neck. Someday, sometime, he is destined to break through the vile bonds that have been cunningly laid on him, escape from the wasting decline that originates from unnatural confinement, and regain once more his primitive freedom of action. The treacherous legislators and illustrious statesmen who are now so eager to teach him the method of growing wool like sheep and how to fit his battle-scarred shoulders to a horse collar may then be sorry and sad, if they have time. For he will probably chew them up. Great and powerful governments commanding peace come into existence only in ages of decadence, when nations are on the downward grade. If the human animal lives a natural, cleanly life out on the plains and forests, away where ocean's rollers crash along the shore, or on the banks of the pouring rivers, he requires no police force to protect him, no usurious Jew to rob him of his harvests, no tax-gathering legislators to vote away his property, and no priest of the idol to save his soul. It is false standards of morality that debase and enfeeble individuals, tribes, and nations. First, in obedience to some sovereign code, they lose their hardihood and increase their numbers. Then, that all may live, they become laborious, submissive to regulations, and finally, with death held up by priestcraft as a fearsome terror, all personal valor fades away. Thus nations of spaniels are manufactured. The normal man is the man that loves and feasts and fights and hunts, the predatory man. The abnormal man is he that toils for a master, half-starves, and thinks, the Christly dog. The first is a perfect animal, the second a perfect monster. Every belief that makes a duty of humility, that inspires a people with moral courage only, enervates their fiber, corrupts their spirit, and prepares them first for thraldom and then for throttling. It is not possible to conceive of grand life without incessant rivalry, perpetual warfare, and the implacable hunting of man by man. Terror, torture, agony, and the wholesale destruction of feeble and worn-out types must mark in future, as in the past, every step forward or backward in evolution, homoculture, and racial displacement. The soil of every nation is an arena, a stamping ground where only the most vigorous animals may hope to hold their own. What is all history but the epic of a colossal campaign, the final Armageddon of which is never likely to be fought, because when men cease to fight, they cease to be men. This old earth is strewn to the very mountaintops with the fleshless skulls and rain-bleached bones of perished combatants in countless myriads. Every square foot, every inch of soil contains its man. 3. The evolution, or de-evolution, of mankind demands the perpetual transfiguration of one man into another, continuous reincarnation, eternal rebirth, and reconstruction. Scientifically considered, the resurrection of the dead is not an illusion. Every living organism is formed from the decomposed essence of pre-existent organisms. The man of today is actually built out of the grave mold of his prototypes, perhaps of ages long forgotten. Thus, without death there could be no birth material, and without conflict, fierce and deadly, there could be no surpassing. But to individuals foolishly trained to bewail their fate, all these commonplace facts are agonizing. What we solemnly look upon this perpetual conflict, writes Schelling with true theocratic pessimism, it fills us with shuddering sorrow and with boundless alarm. When we solemnly look upon this perpetual conflict, writes Schelling, with true theocratic pessimism, it fills us with shuddering sorrow and with boundless alarm, but how could we help it? Hence the veil of sadness that has spread over all nature, the deep, indestructible melancholy of all life. Like many other philosophers, deceived by appearances, Schelling fancies savage and dreadful that which is pure, mischievous that which is preservative, and calamitous that which is benign. The flow of destruction is as natural and as needful as the flow of water. No human ingenuity can destroy the immolation of man, nor prevent the shedding of blood. And why should it? Majestic nature continues on her tragic way serenely, caring not for the wails of the agonized and panic-stricken, nor the protests of defeat, but smiling sadly, proudly, yet somewhat disdainfully in her passing stride at the victor's fierce hurrah. She loves the writhing of sword blades, the rending of tradition, the crunching of bones, and the flap of shredded shot-torn banners. streaming out savagely, in the night, in the day, over the battle-weary, the mangled dying and the swollen dead. Christ may come and Christ may go, but Caesar lives forever. Deep, permanent, and abiding is the elemental antagonism between the sociology of the man of Nazareth and the imprescriptible laws of the universe. They are as fire and water to each other, irreconcilable. Indeed, our planetary system itself shall melt with fervent heat ere the Galilean's philosophy can conquer. No human being can ever hope to attain the perfectibility that is in Christ. So long as we remain animals, we shall be dominated by animal wants and animal passions and animal rivalries. Undoubtedly, the Messiah ideal is unattainable, hopeless, and especially so upon its reformatory side. However, the world loves to be deceived by some ghastly delusion, and that is the reason, perhaps, that it has taken to its bosom this rustic fable, this gospel of ineffectuality, this evangel of darkness, this dream of an Israelite slave. When the Assyrians, and after them the Medes and Persians, writes Tacitus, were masters of the Oriental world, the Jews of all nations, then held in subjection, were deemed the most contemptible. Christ was a pirate. Among the virile, conquering tribes, the ideal man is ever the all-daring Jove, the splendid Apollo, the self-reliant Achilles, or the constructive genius. It is only in centuries of dotage, in ages of cankersome downgoing and nervous disease, that the model man becomes a Christ. The model man of our forefathers was Odin, a warlord. But our ideal man is a weeping, horsewhipped Jew, a Jew for a god. The deities of the Greeks and Vikings, Goths and Romans were all originally mighty men of valor or virile women of surpassing beauty, afterwards held up before their warlike posterity as splendid examples of natural nobility, conscious power, daring courage, shrewdness, sexual vigor, and boundless strength of character. The gods and heroes of antiquity spent their vital force in the destruction of monsters, in the seizure of new hunting grounds, in the slaughtering of tyrants, and in the breeding of unconquerable sons. But Christ, the God of Christendom, the divine exemplar, that majestic figure, what godlike deed did he ever do? What unconquerable sons did he beget? If the first principles of Christianity should, by an unforeseen miracle, triumph in the elemental conflict that is approaching, assuredly the Anglo-Saxon is played out. His days numbered, his dominion ended, his sepulchre prepared. Multitudinous multiplication of unfit millions, broods of strenuous semi-idiots must then proceed through dreary, barren, brain-paralyzing centuries, winding up perhaps in a blast of pestilential plague, a Black Death. The dead and alive conditions of the celestial empire will then be applied to this Western world, and under the thin disguise of advancement, progress, and civilization, an atmosphere of excruciating torture must be artificially created, hostile to all but degenerative forces as in China. In the name of goodness, righteousness, and morality, woe shall be poured out upon our seed as it has already been poured out on the rotten swarms of the Orient. Congenital enfeeblement of body, together with organic degeneracy of mind, must then go on and on at an ever-accelerating ratio until our posterity may end, as Darwin imagined we began, by becoming chattering apes, without sense enough to light a fire, crack a coconut, or swing by their tails. Behold the modern man, this heir of all the ages in the foremost ranks of time. His sight, taste, smell, and hearing are all notoriously defective. He can harness thunderbolts, but the unerring instinct of a carrier pigeon is beyond him. His brain has become an overheated thinking engine, but he may not read the Daily Morning Lyre without spectacles. He understands more things, or thinks he does, but if suddenly removed from his artificial environment, he would perish as helplessly as the babes in the wood. He can gauge sound waves, photograph broken bones, construct gigantic iron monsters, whisper across miles of copper wire. But when the pointer dog sniffs the hidden pheasant from afar off, this erudite bundle of nerves looks on in blank amazement. The fact is that the civilized man is gradually losing his senses. If he continues to progress at the existing rate, in a comparatively little while, he will have no smell, no sight, no hearing. Direr visions, worse foreboding, glare upon me through the ancient gloom. Europe's smoke cloud sinks, corroding on the land in noisome fume, showering down like rain of ashes on the cities of God's doom. Bustling smug, a pygmy pack plucks its prey from ore's embraces, walks with crooked soul and back, glares like dwarfs with greedy eyes for the golden glittering lies. It is good for a degraded people to be utterly consumed. 4. In the department of natural history, it is axiomatic that all kinds of living beings, from protozoa to man, subsist and propagate through and by the destruction of feebler competitors belonging to the same species or to kindred species. Thus the big fish eat the little fish, the big trees, by absorbing and monopolizing the nutriment, eat up the little trees, the strong animals eat the weak animals, and so on ad infinitum. Man is no exception. Conquering and masterful nations have ever been ravenous devourers of flesh food, and most of them have also been man-eaters. The slaughterhouses of Christendom reek with the dying effluvia of millions and millions of butchered brutes. That man, the king of animals, may day by day eat flesh, drink blood, and gnaw bones. Even cannibalism is not extinct in far lands, nor quite unknown in the centers of our proudest civilizations. With the first great revolutionary cataclysm, its revival upon a gigantic scale is not an improbability. During the 11th century, man's flesh was cooked, sold, and eaten in England, and Englishmen may again revert to anthropophagy if ever their imported food supplies should be suddenly and entirely cut off, either by convulsions of nature or acts of war. Shipwrecked crews have repeatedly saved themselves by casting lots and devouring some of their number, and shipwrecked nations, loaded up to the hatches with seething cargoes of festering, useless nondescripts, may yet be driven to do the same. Innumerable are the folklore legends relating to ancient and modern man-eaters. Formal human sacrifices upon the altars of idols are quite common. In Mexico and ancient Britain, prelates butchered their victims, generally young virgins, in public, amid the acclaim of musical instruments, the chanting of beautiful liturgies, and the hosanna shouts of the mob. The modern prelate does not employ the rude smoking gully knife, but uses other weapons 10 times more keen and more destructive. For every human sacrifice offered up in olden times, millions are offered now. 5. Professor Huxley pictorially describes an African butcher shop where human steaks, roasts, and sirloins were systematically retailed. Josephus tells us of mothers who ate their own infants during the last siege of Jerusalem, and in many later sieges human flesh has been consumed. Oriental traditions record of King Richard Lionheart that once upon a time, when presiding at a feast of Moslem heads, he remarked with grim matter-of-factness, "One roast Saracen made good entertainment for 9 or 10 of my good Christian men." An English crusading rhymer is even proud of this. King Richard shall warrant there is no flesh so nourishant unto an Englishman, partridge, plover, heron, ne swan, cow, ne ox, sheep, ne swine, as the roast head of a Saracen. Very intelligent New Zealand aboriginals may still be found who describe with much apparent gusto how, in comparatively recent dates, they satiated their ravenous hunger by banqueting all night upon the grilled flesh of foemen they had tomahawked during the day. Neither is it uncommon to hear tattooed old veterans tell how war captives were penned up like cattle and fattened upon each other until required for the tribal oven, formed of red-hot stones paved into an oval hollow in the ground. How then the fattest were selected one by one, taken out, systematically bled, disemboweled, and hung up by the heels on neighboring trees, just as sheep, swine, and cattle are exposed for sale in our own abattoirs and meat markets. The Maoris also have a tradition that if a man kills and eats his enemy, he by doing so absorbs all the dead man's vitality, strength, and courage. In the nascent colony of New Zealand, missionaries, soldiers, whalers, and pioneers were often cooked and eaten, but by a general consensus of Epicurean opinion, the pakeha's flesh was voted bad form, principally because it was too tough and too salty. During the War on Secession, Northern infantrymen accidentally imprisoned in a Virginia mine devoured each other one at a time. The last man, John Ewing, dying of hunger and leaving a written record of the facts sealed up in a flask. The story of Shawnee Bean is well known, and the classical legends of the Cyclops, the Giants, the Phalaris Bull, the Moloch Holocausts, and Homer's Polyphemus. Anthropophagy has been practiced in Australia both by whites and black fellows. In New Guinea and portions of Africa, man-eating is quite an ordinary custom to this hour. Marcus Clarke describes how Gabbett, an English-born Botany Bay convict, induced his prison comrades to escape with him into the bush in order that he might have a holiday and a feast, picking their succulent bones and sucking out the marrow thereof. All over continental Europe there is a popular superstition that Jew rabbis steal and murder Christian infants and maidens in order to use the blood on the door lintels at Passover and other ceremonials. A similar charge was brought against the early Christians and even proved in the imperial law courts if we are to judge by the verdicts. Human fat is regularly retailed in modern drugstores, and human heads are even now a marketable commodity in the South Seas. There are also mystic brotherhoods in our midst whose initiates pledge fidelity and obligate themselves to lifelong secrecy by drinking blood out of a skull over emblems of violent death with daggers pointed at their throats. The foundation stones of many famous buildings, palaces, castles, temples, and monuments have been emblematically laid upon the living body of a man. The Kremlin, for example. Is not the communion service allegorical anthropophagy? Is it not a pious, periodical cannibal feast in more ways than one? Does not the wine symbolize human blood, and the wafers typify human flesh? Metaphorically considered, every trading Christian state is a meat market, wherein the flesh, bones, and blood not only of men, but of women and little children are bought and sold daily, offered up nominally for the love of God, really for the love of dollars. Atrocities of the most revolting description are of daily, hourly occurrence, not only in Turkey and Siam, but in New York and Chicago, not only in Cuba and Port Arthur, but in London, Madrid, and Paris, not only in Mashonaland and on the Congo, but in St. Petersburg and Berlin. Men, women, and little children are being everywhere starved slowly to the grave, worked till they fall down, driven insane by legislation, and even tortured to death inch by inch. Great financial corporations, backed by the state, directed mostly by Hebrews, literally coin great empires into golden dividends, and upon the share lists of mortgage banks and man-devouring institutions generally may be found the names of bishops, popes, preachers, generals, governors, statesmen, and other human carnivores by the thousand. He who doubts should look up the official share registers and behold the long rows of adorable names belonging to high priests, philanthropists, and rulers appearing thereon. Cannibalism was practiced in ancient Greece at the period of highest culture. Herodotus describes Asian feasts where man's flesh was the chief dish, and down to the 13th century the Tibetans were in the habit of making their parents into broth. There are confraternities still in existence into which no one is ever admitted until he has killed a man. Among the Dyaks, as among our own ancestors, a youth is never considered a full-grown person capable of founding a home until he has slain at least one enemy in battle. The Thugs of India, a religious sect, brought the science of holy murder by strategic violence to such a pitch of perfection that they have never been surpassed, not even by Grant or Moltke. The Kinder Awas of India make a regular practice of eating all their diseased, useless, senile, and decrepit relations, just as packs of wolves fall upon any of their number that is seriously wounded in foray. In portions of Sumatra, lawbreakers are neither imprisoned nor electrocuted, but actually carved up and eaten alive, piece by piece. The Kapanagugas of South America make of their own stomachs the sepulchre of their dead relatives. A funeral with them is a banquet, the collation being a corpse. The Terra del Fuegans throttle and eat all very old women. The Monbutus of Central Africa carry on aggressive wars to capture flesh food. They also dry human flitches in the sun and smoke them for export. During the Taiping Rebellion, Chinese soldiers, under General Gordon,